When you hear the word altar, what do you think of? See, depending on your background, everyone's going to think of something slightly different. One person's going to think of one thing, another person's going to think of something else. You know, if your faith background is one area, when you hear altar, you think of that little table inside of the church where they keep the sacred objects, they keep the wine and the bread for the sacraments and for the communion. But if you grew up in another faith background, when you hear the word altar, what you think of is like a little bench down at the front of the church, and that's where you come and kneel down and you pray at the end of a service or something like that. But everyone's going to think of something different for an altar. Altars have been used for centuries by Christianity, by Buddhism, by Hinduism, and even in witchcraft. And for hundreds of years, pagans would use altars in order to offer sacrifices or worship up to all kind of different deities or pagan gods. There are altar boys, there are altar girls, there are marriage altars, there are altars in shrines and in temples and in churches, and even altars in ancient Judaism. In the Old Testament, God comes to Moses and God commands Moses to build an altar. And this altar was going to be used for animal sacrifices and ultimately for the forgiveness of sins. And so Moses, through the law that he's given by God, institutes this commandment for the Hebrew people. And for 2,000 years, the Hebrew people offered sacrifices for the forgiveness of sins. But if you want to rewind a little bit, before Moses ever came on the scene, 1,000 years before God commanded Moses, 1,000 years before the 10 Commandments were given, 1,000 years before the law was instituted, we find the story of a man who is building altars, not because it was a commandment, not because he had to, but surprisingly, because he chose to. And we know this man today as Abraham. Abraham was an imperfect man. He was a flawed man. The Bible doesn't ever try to hide this or cover this up. At times, Abraham is a fearful man. He is an insecure man. He's caught being untruthful with people. Yet for all his faults and all of his flaws, he is known for his relationship with God. Abraham was a man who was so close to God that the Bible refers to him as God's friend. His relationship with God was so deep and so profound that today, all these years later, he's still known as the father of all people who trust in God and look to him in faith. Abraham was born almost 4,000 years ago, and yet today he's still viewed as a patriarch of the faith, the patriarch of the faith, and known as a founding father to all believers. Now imagine this, not even 4,000 years into the future. Let's just say 100 years into the future. What is that one defining characteristic or trait that you will be known for? When your great-great-great-grandchildren are researching their family tree and researching their family history on the internet or whatever AI version of internet they're going to have in 100 years, who knows? But as they're doing research on their family tree and they come to you, what is that? Those qualities, those achievements, those characteristics that they're going to learn about you? Are they going to be interested in your career? Are they going to be interested in your education? Are they going to be interested in the amount of money that you made or even your hobbies? Chances are they're probably not. Because 100 years from now, more than likely, none of that stuff will matter to them. Now, imagine this. What if your relationship with God was so profound and so impactful and so defining and so distinctive that rather than remembering you for something that won't even matter, they will remember you for the altars that you built unto God? This was true of Abraham. Abraham was known for the altars that he built. He literally left a trail of altars wherever he went. And What's amazing is that this is even before the time of heavy machinery, before the time of tractors and backhoes, and that means if an altar was going to be built, it was a labor-intensive process. It was a back-breaking process, and building an altar would give you calluses, it would give you blisters. There was no easy way to build an altar. It could only be done one way, and it was by hand. By using your hands to pick up heavy rocks and stack them one on top of another, over and over again. There was no shortcut. There was no cheat code. There was no microwave. If one was going to offer an acceptable sacrifice unto God, if someone was going to offer a sweet-smelling savor unto Him, or if one was going to get the attentions of the heaven, it required something of you. It required sweat. It required effort. It required commitment. It required sacrifice. And today, because of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, we don't have to build altars for animal sacrifices for our forgiveness of sins. However, there are still altars that need to be built. They are not literal altars. They are symbolic altars. They are not material altars. They are spiritual altars. And for Abraham, his altars represented his acknowledgement of, his approach to, and his appreciation of God. They represented worship. For Abraham, his altar was the place that he would curate. It was the place that he would prepare. It was a place of purpose and intentionality. It was the place where he would meet God and where God would meet him. It represented Abraham's commitment to God. It represented Abraham's willingness to seek after God. And what I love about Abraham is that to him, it was all worth it. God was worth it. God was worth the effort. God was worth the calluses and the blisters and the back pain. God was worth the hike or the trek up that mountain. God was worth the sacrifice. Just as Abraham would offer up a goat or a ram by placing it on the altar and then taking his knife and raising in the air and then taking the life of that animal, even so we today have to place ourselves on the altar. But God doesn't require that we lay our lives down, but a death must still take place nevertheless. But rather than us dying, it requires our pride dying. It requires our will dying. Our desires, our ambitions, our ungodly passions have to die. And we don't offer ourselves as a dead sacrifice, but now we continue living and become a living sacrifice. The covenant has changed, but we are still called to build altars. We're still called to take up crosses and commit ourselves to God. These next 2 months, we're going to challenge you like you've never been challenged. We're going to attempt to break down every preconceived notion that we have about what an altar is. We're going to attempt to change the way you approach the altar. We're going to begin asking questions like, where is the place you've created? Where is the place you've prepared? Where is your place of intentionality? Where is the place that you've built with your hands? Where is the place where you meet God and God meets you?